Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. All right, man. As you guys do know, we have the Grand Prix going on right now, and it is round 4. So I do have the Wesley Silver Sam Shankland game for you guys, and for all my people that are coming from the Philippines, I will say mabuhay, kumusta na aking mga kaibigan? Maraming salamat po sa nanonood ng aking mga video. Mabuting pagbati-ingat lagi. I do some like Uber and Lyft driving, and I actually had the chance to, give 2 guys that were visiting the U.S. from the Philippines a ride. So it was a very interesting ride. So, yes, anyways, for all my people that are English speaking or are coming from America, what's up? If you guys seen Scary Movie 2, then you guys remember that scene. They're like, what's up? Anyway. Yeah, if you guys are ready to go, let's see what we have for this game. All right, so we got D4, knight to F6. We got C4, G6. So we are already getting into the King's Indian defense. Very solid, opening to play as black. You're just really trying to rapidly develop your pieces as quickly as possible. So we do have G3. We got C6, bishop to G2, and we have D5. And we have kind of like a Slav, King's Indian, even Catalan type of hybrid thing going on. And I will tell you guys something after a little while that's really like typical of these positions. But continuing on, we do have pawn taking D5, pawn taking D5. And this is one way to kind of like resolve the tension in the center. Because it can get, kind of crazy with like, pawns getting pushed and you just have a bunch of pawn clumps here. We got knight to C3. We see bishop to G7. Knight comes to F3 castles, and we have knight to E5. We got bishop to F5. So, I mean, as I said before, everybody's just doing their, what they need to do to get developed. Black's getting their pieces out. White is getting their pieces out. And in these type of structures, I'm a Catalan player myself, so this is like very familiar to me. The knight is almost always going to come to E5. You are just trying to free up this bishop on this diagonal, and you're trying to make it a little bit hard for black to do some developing because you don't really want to push the B pawn because this rook is going to be hanging. So bishop comes to F4. We see queen down to B6, and then we do see the novelty of the game, which is queen to B3. Basically, Wesley So is telling Sam Shankland, I don't like your queen. So, we're going to see what Shankland does in this position. We do see knight to C6. And then Wesley So takes the opportunity just to exchange queens. Queen takes B6, pawn takes B6. And we do have E3, and then we do have a rook down to A5. Now, like I said before, something I did want to kind of show you guys is in this position here, you do have the ability to take on E5 with the knight. But as I always tell you guys, when you are trading pieces, you always got to kind of think what you're giving your opponent. And this is a very structural type of situation where white really would love for the knight to take on E5 because it is a very thematic type of situation. Like I said, you do have the bishop open on this diagonal. You have the knight attacking D5. So you are going to be taking with the pawn in this case, even though probably some of you guys might be thinking, well, why don't I take with the bishop? Because then my structure's not bad. Well, I mean, the thing about it is you're going to be taking with the pawn, so you are kind of messing up your structure, but you're going to be getting a pawn back in exchange. So if the pawn does take here, whether you look at knight to G4 or knight back to D7, you are going to be looking at snapping this pawn. And this comes with quite a few threats. I mean, you are threatening knight to E7 with check, possibly picking up this bishop, and you are continuing the influence on this bishop on this long diagonal. And this bishop is kind of shut out, as you can see. So you are getting a lot for that situation. But like I said, you do see rook down to A5, not allowing this to occur. You really, as black, would love for the knight to take here because then you can correct your pawn structure. But Wesley So is not about that. So we do see castles. We got H6. We see H4, another move that's very thematic. When you have like Catalans or even having like King's India type stuff, H4 is going to be creating some lift for your king. But then it's also, you don't really want G5 to come because this bishop is really beautifully placed. And plus, it is kind of getting trapped if you don't play H4. So you're kind of forced. We do see Rook F to A8. We see rook over to c1. Now, you know, black is more than welcome to take this pawn here, but they will be giving up the exchange, and it's not quite, you know, fair. Also, you are uncovering an attack on this knight with the rook, so you're going to be getting some good material. So we do have e6. We got bishop to f3. We see g5, pawn takes g5, pawn takes g5. We got knight taking c6. And you don't really want to take here because you're going to be looking at the knight coming up here and then grabbing this bishop and messing up black's pawn structure, even though their pawn structure is kind of bad already. The pawn does take c6, bishop takes g5. And as you can see, white is up an entire pawn in this position. It's not like super winning, but I mean, you know, you got a pawn. I mean, you know, so some people, you know, they might mess around and, you know, kind of crumble a little bit, you know, seeing as they have like, you know, one pawn down. It could be a psychological thing. But we do have c5. Pawn takes c5, pawn takes c5. We see rook f to d1. As you can see, I mean, it's always useful to get these rooks on the best files. Another file is the H file. There's not really a lot going on. So in this case, it is a little bit better to just centralize them. We do see bishop down to g4, king to g2, bishop takes f3, king takes f3. And even though it looks kind of weird, this king came all the way up here. You know, the queens are off the board. So, you know, it's a beneficial situation to start getting your king. You know, as I always say, trying to get your king, you know, moving into you know, into an in-game situation. So the knight does come back to d7, and we have bishop coming up to e7, and we have reached a point in the game that if you do want to pause the video and see a really nice move that black has the ability to play in this position, go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So, you know, black doesn't really have like, you know, a lot of moves that it can play. I mean, really neither side does. I mean, there's not like a super huge amount of progress each side can really make. But something you can be thinking about is just gaining space. And that move, if you guessed it, congratulations, is c4. And it's just restricting, you know, white's movement just a little bit and just giving yourself just a little bit more space to maneuver. You know, you might see like bishop to b4 and then the rook comes back. And I mean, you know, this is, you know, black has like a slight advantage, nothing really to write home about, but I mean, it is something. You know, you have to try to get something when you're down a pawn. So, but that is not what we saw in the game. We actually saw bishop taking c3, and black is just simply wanting to try to get their pawn back. So the rook takes on c3. We see rook taking a2, bishop takes c5, knight takes c5, and then we do have rook taking c5, and then a rook taking on c2. And as you can see, everything is equal. You know, we have pawns, you know, kind of clumped up in one spot in the board, which does make it a little bit easier for the kings in an endgame. You know, it does make it a little bit harder, more interesting when you have pawns kind of like on the outside, you know, outside pass pawns and stuff like that. We do see rook c to c1, rook a to a2. We see rook to f1, king coming down to g7. We see rook to b1, and then we have rook taking b1. And it is in this position that the players do agree to a draw. And I mean, it's dead zero in this position. And I mean, just to kind of play on a little bit more, I mean, you know, you can always like take the rook on b1, but I mean, basically both kings are just basically going to be hiding, you know, behind their pawns. And there really isn't, you know, a good way for these rooks to really do anything. So you might see something like king down to g6, rook to b7, trying to keep the king tied to the pawn, but you got f5, rook down to b4. The king going over to f6, and like I said, I mean, there's not a lot of progress. I mean, this king is basically going to just kind of shift back and forth, and this king is pretty much going to just kind of float around here, and, you know, there's really not much that you can really do. As soon as like a pawn might push or something like that, you're just going to be checking up here, and that's pretty much going to be it. So that is that game, like I said, coming from round 4. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Maraming salamat, King Makaibigan. There was a phrase that I was learning. Mugging tequila. That is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that is like be your best. Or be great. Yes, that's what it means. But like I said, I appreciate it very much, guys, and I will see you guys next time.